Welcome to the Workforce Connections podcast, where we discuss workforce development in Southern Nevada. Here's your host.
Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Villalobos, Chief Programs Officer here at Workforce Connections, Southern Nevada's local workforce development board. Excited for this special edition of our WC podcast here with my dear friend, Grant McCandless, who serves as President and CEO of Social Impact Consultants, a nonprofit agency that provides services to both nonprofit organizations here in Nevada and government entities as well. He's done research regarding best practices and permanent supportive housing. He's also done economic impact of Reno Housing Authority research studies, amongst others. I'm excited today to be talking to him about a particular research study that has to do with our Disconnected Youth Initiative in Southern Nevada. A study titled 30K by 2030, the potential economic and fiscal benefits of connecting 30,000 disconnected youth in Nevada to education and employment. So I want to welcome you, Grant McCandless, here to our WC podcast this afternoon. Super excited about this. As you know, we've had a major focus on disconnected youth here in the greater Las Vegas Valley, where we know there's over 42,500 disconnected youth. That's 16 to 24-year-olds that are neither working nor in school. And so just really appreciate the fact that you took your time, effort, energy to do this research study, which we're going to dig into here in a second. But before we take that dive, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so our audience can get to know who you are?
Sure. And thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. So I grew up in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in a suburb not unlike Henderson. I am a proud graduate of the public school system there and was very fortunate to have exceptional public schools in my hometown. After finishing high school, I went to Texas A&M for college, Gigamags, and looking forward to a win on Saturday over LSU. And at A&M, I studied initially engineering, but then math and eventually psychology was my degree. Here's where my journey maybe got a little unusual. My senior year of college, I did an internship for Price Waterhouse at their office in Frankfurt, Germany. Amazing opportunity to work in Europe for them for 6 months, came back, finished my degree at A&M, and then returned to work for them for 4 years as an income tax accountant for Americans working in Europe. Fantastic experience and job training, right out of college. After 4 years, I realized that how much I loved Europe, but did not love accounting for myself as a career. Wasn't the right fit. So I returned home to explore what my career path would be. Eventually, that led me here 6 years ago. And one of my early consulting clients was a well-known firm by the name of RCG Economics. And I worked on projects such as the Southern Nevada Infrastructure Development Working Group. It was a mouthful. And that mouthful was coined by the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And that was an amazing project, introduced me to a lot of the leaders and decision makers in our community. I eventually went on to become the Director of Research for RCG Economics in 2021. And was very fortunate to learn from Nevada legend John Restrepo. And anyone who's familiar with RCG's work will see John's influence in all of the studies that I do.
That's great, Grant. You took a path that kind of led you, a certain direction, and you were professionally finding yourself, right?
That's right.
And obviously we're here because now you're doing research. You're a consultant specifically in the space of, where's there a need to do research and to look at what's happening in certain space, obviously today, specifically with disconnected youth. I think to do that type of work, it takes a certain wiring, right? Not everybody gets, excited about reading, about writing, about looking at quantitative data and how you put it all together and pop out a report, right?
Yeah.
What was the impetus behind you getting involved in research? Again, we'll get into this particular study here in a second, but why research? What's the driving force behind Grant McCandless doing research and putting stuff like this together?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that, I studied engineering and math at A&M and then worked as an accountant. I've had skills with math for a long time. And recently, the past few years, I've come to really appreciate the philosophy of an Indian doctor who's fairly well known. His name is Deepak Chopra. And in his book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, Chopra says that one of our tasks in life is to discover what our unique talents are that we can use to serve the world. And that's made a real impression on me. And I bring that up because, for the work I do now, you need skills in math as well as technical writing. And there's plenty of people that are far more proficient at math and economics than I am. Some of them struggle to write clearly. And for this work, you have to be able to do both. And have become fairly skilled at doing both. And I find that really fulfilling to do work that plays to those strengths. And, I mentioned that my undergrad degree is psychology, so I had to do a lot of reading of academic literature for that and have enjoyed that kind of research since I encountered it in college. So and on top of all of that, not only using my unique sort of talents to be able to do work that helps, youth who feel lost, who are disconnected from their future, that just kind of is a dream job and, more than I could hope for.
Yeah. And I can back you on that, Grant. I mean, I think when I first had a chance to talk to you about, this Disconnected Youth Initiative, I know it piqued your interest. And what I appreciated is that you being someone with this skill set, this education, this experience, and bringing all that to the table and being us in this coalition of partners behind this effort, being able to benefit from your skill set, so really want to just give you a special thanks for that. And I remember our first conversation and how excited you were to engage, maybe at that point, us not even knowing, right, that you would be kind of doing this type of research. And so, again, we're going to get into it with our viewers here in a second. I'm excited to hear more about it. I'm excited for you to share about it with our viewers. But what inspired you to do this research specifically with regards to what we're talking about today?
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful to be a member of the Vegas Chamber's class of 2023 Leadership Las Vegas.
Honey Badgers.
Honey Badgers.
Yeah.
And through that amazing experience, I made a very good friend who is involved in workforce development and changing lives. And he told me about the great things Workforce Connections is doing, as well as this new initiative. And that friend is sitting across the table from me. And Ricardo, I'm very grateful to you for introducing me to your work here for Workforce Connections.
Yeah, me too.
So that inspired me in part. And you invited me to one of the early convenings, which I attended, and I kept attending them because I could feel the energy, the enthusiasm from these 28 community partners that the initiative has gathered now. And, I know that you grew up in Vegas, and it must feel for people who have grown up here that, you're giving back to your community. Because I didn't grow up here, I think of it more as I'm paying it forward. I mentioned that I was fortunate to have a tremendous public school experience, and an experience that not every one of the disconnected youth we're talking about has been so fortunate to have. So I feel like I'm paying forward those, those privileges that I had, and able to, now do some of the work, that, when, coming back to why this particular study, when you passed me that opportunity from the Office of Workforce Innovation to apply for this research grant, I thought about, well, what could I do to support the Disconnected Youth Initiative? And it didn't take me long to think of the economic impact studies that I used to do at RCG Economics and that I also did for the Reno Housing Authority recently. And it was clear to me that a study like this would be of tremendous benefit to raising awareness to what we're missing out on as a region as well as a state if we don't help these youth reconnect.
Yeah, thank you for that, Grant. One of the things that excites me and keeps my fire burning about this effort, besides the fact that, as you mentioned, I'm a native here, but it's being able to be around like-minded individuals who, once they hear our circumstances, they say, I want to do something. I want to bring who I am to the table. I want to give, as you say, pay it forward. I want to give the best of myself and the best that I have to offer to this effort. Right. And again, just want to thank you for that. Again, we have 42,500 in the greater Las Vegas Valley area that, as you mentioned, 28 plus community partners and growing. Every convening, more and more people interested in bringing themselves to the table, bringing solutions to the table, resources to the table, and being champions, right, in this space. And so, I know this research study had to do with an economic benefits analysis, right? Big word, at least for me, maybe not so much for our viewers, but we're going to take a deep dive into that. But why don't you tell us, just on the front end, and again, we'll revisit it on the back end, give us some details, give us a key takeaway that you want us to hear on the front end. And then again, we'll take that dive and then we'll come back to that key takeaway to make sure it's reinforced, I should say, for our viewers.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're going to get into some very mathy things here in a bit, but, the key takeaway is that investing in our disconnected youth now, those youth who are disconnected from education, employment, and ultimately their futures, investing in them now, we're investing in our own future 6 years from now, 16 years from now, even 60 years from now. That's the key takeaway. Awesome. Okay. Now,
Tell us about the study. Give us an overview, and then I'll probably just ask you a few questions kind of as we, get a chance to dialogue here a bit more. But give us an overview. Give our viewers an overview of this research, and kind of set the context for us.
Yeah, sure. So the report is titled 30K by 2030 because it estimates the economic and fiscal benefits of reconnecting 30,000 disconnected youth statewide to education and employment through the end of the decade. Now, this study was funded by a generous grant from the Office of Workforce Innovation at the state and involved using a database they've created called NPWR, NPWR, that is a collaboration between various state agencies like the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation, the Nevada's System of Higher Education, the Department of Adult Education, submit data to this database, and then the researchers, like my research team, were given funds to analyze, to crunch those numbers and make some recommendations. And so our particular study looked at what the economic impact would be. Economic impact is GDP, gross domestic product, as well as job creation. Fiscal benefits include increased sales taxes, as well as savings to county and city budgets in terms of social services, in terms of Medicaid, juvenile justice, etc. So there were two scenarios that this study compared. One was an ideal scenario, and one was a little more conservative. And here's sort of the impact and the takeaway. Just looking at Southern Nevada alone, if we connect over 22,000 is the Southern Nevada share of that 30,000. If we connect that many disconnected youth through 2030, we're going to see 12 billion in economic growth. 12 billion with a B. and an additional $4 billion in fiscal benefits. Now, economic growth you can't spend. That's just a measure of how the economy grows. But those $4 billion in fiscal benefits, those can be spent towards programs to reconnect those youth.
Awesome. I'm hearing I'm hearing one main thing, all right? I'm hearing, Grant, that this has the potential to be a great, phenomenal opportunity for Nevada's economy.
Game changer. Yeah.
On the other hand, I'm hearing it also has the potential to be a serious challenge for Nevada's economy. Am I following you?
That's right. That's right. So if we fail to support these youth so that they can reconnect to the labor force, it's going to cost us about $3.5 billion in Southern Nevada in those social programs, in making sure that they are housed and fed and have, Medicaid and healthcare and stay, out of trouble with the law. We're going to spend $3.5 billion, and we're going to miss out on $400 million in sales taxes that we would otherwise see. So that's the cost of these youth not reconnecting.
Wow. Game changer, life changer.
Yeah, life changer.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to get back to a number you mentioned regarding the disconnected youth target. You mentioned 22,400 for Southern Nevada. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So the original target of the Disconnected Youth Initiative was 21,000. And that was based on the 42,000 you mentioned, cutting that number in half over 5 years. And that 5-year timeline is 2028. When I proposed this study was larger than just Southern Nevada and over a longer time frame through the end of the decade. So the way that works is the disconnected youth in Southern Nevada are about 75% of the statewide number. And so if we're going to connect 30,000 through 2030, 75% of that is 22,400, the target, set for this research and what the benefits would be if we succeed.
Great. Thank you for that clarity. There's, again, a couple of things I wanted to follow up on just for clarity for our viewers to really understand, at the core of this study, its significance, right? You mentioned weighted scenario 1 in respect to job and economic growth. Can you tell us what you mean by weighted, just so our viewers, including myself, have a better understanding of what you mean by weighted in scenario 1 that you mentioned earlier?
Sure. So DETR is the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation. They have projections by industry and occupation through the end of the decade. I took that information combined with data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is the BEA, combine those. So looked at the highest growth occupations according to DETR and those industries from the BEA that make the largest contribution to our economic growth. GDP, for those who aren't familiar, it's one of the most well-known measures of economic growth, but what it means is the final value of goods and services in an economy in 1 year. So what I call in the report the target jobs, those are the high growth ones according to DETR, as well as high impact ones from the BEA. Let's take an example of the construction occupations. I understand your father was in construction.
He was a darn good one at that.
Good. So many of those construction occupations require only a high school equivalency for an entry-level job.
Yeah.
But they also contribute $130,000 to our GDP per job, per year, actually.
Oh.
And so they make a huge impact, even for high school equivalency, right? So part of the takeaway there is you don't have to have a bachelor's degree for an industry or an occupation to make a big impact. So when I say this study weighted those jobs, it put some priority, let's say, is maybe a synonym for weighted, priority on those jobs like construction, let's say, that have above average contribution to the economy.
Grant, you mentioned target jobs and industries. And there's been some great research in our community, centered around economic growth, emerging industries. I'm specifically referring to the LVGEA Workforce Blueprint.
Mm.
And, one thing I'm always trying to be mindful of is, the mixed messages that are sent to folks in the workforce and economic development space. Does this line up? Does this contradict? Is this a second opinion, a different perspective, another angle? Can you speak to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complementary, should be viewed as complementary, but slightly different. So because this study was funded, as I said, by the Office of Workforce Innovation, and part of the task was to use that Empower database. That's one of the ingredients, let's say, of this study that was not an ingredient in the Workforce Blueprint, right? So taking that data combined with, Dieter's projections and the BEA, I arrived at a slightly different projection or estimate of the benefits and prioritization of industries. That doesn't mean it contradicts, but in research you don't want to presume what you're trying to prove. Right? You don't want to start, if you're doing good research, you have a hypothesis, you don't assume what the outcome is going to be. And so I didn't want to do that. So these are independent analyses of the Southern Nevada economy, but complementary ones. Maybe if we take an analogy like, a pizza restaurant, right? The Workforce Blueprint is a pizza, and this study is a pizza. That one might be a supreme pizza, and it has its own unique ingredients that were used to make it what the study it is. This study has slightly different ingredients, is complementary, but not the same.
Thank you for the analogy. That helps clarify things for me. Another follow-up question for you is, why didn't you use pay to weight the jobs?
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. Because of course, if any of the disconnected youth are watching, they may be thinking, well, what am I going to earn if I'm in that construction job or in the pizza restaurant, right? Yeah. So two reasons that pay was not used as like the criteria to prioritize occupations and industries. Number one, it's a value judgment to do that, right? Like it says that pay is the most important, or should be the most important factor in deciding what your career is going to be. And a lot of people would disagree with that. Researchers or research that was done not by me says that that's not usually, on average, what makes for a fulfilling career for most people. I myself had that experience. My last accounting job was for a law firm, paid extremely well, but just was not meaningful to me enough for me to stay in that profession. So it's a value judgment to say that pay should be the criterion. Secondly, there's one approach to calculating GDP that the Bureau of Economic Analysis does that includes the earnings of workers in that GDP calculation. And so it's baked into that final number. So by using GDP, it incorporates earnings and pay into the prioritization, as I said, but it does it without making pay the focus and the main point.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. As you mentioned, if our targeted audience with this podcast were the young men and women kind of in this space, we probably want to focus on pay. Mm-hmm. But I think from an economic analysis, you're providing a broader perspective, right? You're talking bigger picture, and again, the impact that it has on our local economy, Nevada economy at large. So understood. Thank you for sharing that. As we come near the end of this podcast, this dialogue, this great time together, was there any findings that you didn't anticipate? Was there anything that you discovered that like wowed you, basically?
There were. There were two that were rather unexpected. The first is that, so I used, like I said, those Dieter projections through the end of the decade, but to also get kind of a second opinion, if you will, there was a study done by the Lindsay Institute and Brookings Mountain West at UNLV a couple of years ago. And in that study, there's a table that has independent sort of job projections by what's called economic cluster. And so I used that data to sort of compare and contrast. And so what that allowed me to do, I could average the two projections and also take the maximum and the minimum. So what surprised me was the conservative estimates that I named already, like the 12 billion in growth for Southern Nevada and the 4 billion in fiscal benefits. Those conservative estimates are actually from the optimistic job growth projections. Which at first I thought I had made a mistake when I saw that. And then when I dug into the formulas and looked at, made sure everything was calculating correctly, the reason for that is those optimistic projections are expecting larger job growth in industries and occupations that make a smaller impact, right? So sort of the inverse or reverse of that is if we invest as a community, as a region, in industries and jobs that have higher impact, we're going to see greater than 12 billion growth. That's the conservative estimate, which ironically is from more optimistic job projections.
Yeah.
So that was the first of the two unexpected results. The second was, like I said, there are two scenarios. The first one weighted by GDP. The second just put like 85% target for youth with a high school equivalency joining the labor force. Basically, as soon as possible, as soon as workforce connections can get them, connected to a job. And that scenario through 2030 has a higher economic impact. And maybe it shouldn't have surprised me because it's a timing issue, right? If they already have their high school equivalency, and we know that about 58% of these youth already finished high school or got their GED. If they go right to the labor force, they're immediately making an impact and contribution to our economy. Whereas if they need to take the time to get an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, that's, 2 years, 4 years, maybe more before they are working and contributing to the economy. It's not to say that they're not spending their time wisely, they are, but it's delayed when they can contribute economically. So what that means is through 2030, there's actually like a higher impact from direct to the labor force, a higher percentage going direct to the labor force. But if you stretch your timeline out to 2035, 2040, the other scenario overtakes it because you're getting faster economic growth from those bachelor's degree, occupations and industries. So if you're taking the long view, scenario one is the better one.
Yeah. And I guess if I understood you correctly, whichever scenario you take, the number 4 billion is the one that stands out.
Yeah. In money we can spend on programs and on supporting these youth. Right. And it's even bigger. It's 12 if we're talking about economic growth. Yeah.
Economic growth, 12 billion, 4 billion. I mean, again, with a B, appreciate that emphasis. With a B. Yeah. As I said earlier, what comes back to my mind is the fact that this is either a great opportunity or a serious challenge. Mm. And, different people, different organizations bring different things to the table. Mm. And I see that in the coalition. So grateful, proud to be a part of this coalition with, again, over 28, organizations that are coming together to say, I'm going to do my part. You representing social impact consultants, obviously, and, multiple others. But, there's decisions, there's things that policymakers, right? High level decision makers, they hear this. And what do you have to say to policymakers, legislators, whether it's at the local level, the state level, what should they hear?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The answer to so what is there are substantial positive impacts economically, fiscally for our economy if we invest in these youth. Not to mention, the well-being of these youth as individuals, right? So there's the combined economic case to be made for doing this, as well as it's just right to invest in their well-being, right? Because
that's right.
Their future is our future. So the key question is, if we would see $4 billion in fiscal benefits, which we can spend on programs to support these youth, if we'd see that much of benefit by 2030, how much could we invest now so that we don't miss out on that benefit, and so that we don't miss out on the $12 billion in growth? What could we invest now? What would we be willing to pay now so as not to miss out?
Wow, man. So I'm hearing pay now or pay later.
Right.
On the one extreme, we connect none of our young men and women and end up $4 billion in cost by 2030.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other extreme, we connect, the 22,400
Mm-hmm. Right.
and end up with an economic benefit of 12 billion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow. And so I hear the pay now or pay later, but bottom line, we're going to pay.
Yeah.
And I think, our message just in general to the coalition or anyone interested, anyone concerned, anyone engaged is do your part, whatever your part is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's legislation,
Yep.
whether it's funding. I do want to just give a special shout out and thanks to Yali Lincroft from the Walter S. Johnson Foundation, Marjorie Parker with the Jobs First New York City. These are investors in the work that we're doing. This is philanthropy saying, hey, we see the work, we want to support the work, get behind the work, and do their part as philanthropic investors, right? But again, there's only so much that you can do with, their particular funding, the funding through, Workforce Connections. Again, I just want to be clear that, through the funding that we invest in the community to provide workforce development for youth, we're only looking at approximately 1,000 youth that we can serve. When, as you noted, and as we've been kind of sharing with the community, anybody who'll listen, we have 42,500. And that's in the current cohort. We're not even talking about, this is for another podcast, the fact that we need to disrupt the pipeline that's going to continue to feed the cohort because, again, by 2030, we can say, yeah, we've, connected 22,400 from the cohort today. But then if we didn't disrupt the pipeline, it could still be 22,400 by 2030. And it could appear to be that we haven't done anything. So, so many fronts to attack this. A friend I heard once say it's a challenge-tunity. Here's the challenge before us, but we also have a great opportunity before us. Mm-hmm. And together, we could really make some great impact.
Yeah.
Good stuff, Grant. Great stuff. I said I'd circle back to this. In closing, what do you want to stick? Whatever seat you sit in, at whatever level, if you have any inkling of a desire to want to engage in this collective impact with connecting our young men and women, what do you want to stick for these people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you want them to walk away with? They've, listened to this podcast for, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 minutes. What do you want them to walk away with? Why don't you tell us that again?
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of kind of us against them thinking in our country right now. And, some people may think, well, that's their problem. Like, let's let those youth figure it out for themselves. The key takeaway here is investing in them is also investing in ourselves, in our community. Investing in them now is investing in our community 6 years from now and down the road. And it's not only the right thing to do, it makes all the economic sense in the world.
Yeah. Appreciate that, Grant. Man, it's been just a great time just talking about this, taking a deeper dive into this. Again, really, I know I've said it a few times and I'll continue to say it, how much just I appreciate your engagement. That you're sold out. You're all in on this effort. I know There's going to be future opportunities for more research, right? And looking at the impact that we can have together, or looking at where we should target our efforts, right? When it comes to disconnected youth programming, disconnected youth interventions, disconnected youth collaborations. Yep. And so I really do hope that, you continue forward in this space, because we want to be data driven in our decision making. I think this gives a very big picture perspective of the significance, really the big picture why, we're doing this work. And again, as you mentioned, most importantly, because the impact it has on the lives of these young men and women, which will subsequently have an effect on their families' lives, on the community's lives, on the Southern Nevada regional, area, as a whole, but also Nevada's economy as a whole. So thank you for doing this. Really want you to know that I personally, Workforce Connections, support you continuing to do research work in this space. So whatever you need from us, you have a partner. And so, again, just thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for giving me the privilege of being a part of this effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
It means the world to me.
Absolutely. In closing, I want to thank our viewers for joining us today. Hopefully you've heard something that's inspired your engagement with our Disconnected Youth Initiative. But if anything, it's provided you information of the significance of the work that's happening in our community to reconnect our young men and women 16 to 24 who are neither working nor in school, because it has a greater impact. As we connect one young man or one young woman, it has a significant impact on our economy in Nevada. Also want to give a special thank to the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation for supporting Grant McCandless with this work. We hope to continue more research in the future through your efforts there at the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation. And again, to our viewers, just thank you for watching this special edition of Workforce Connections podcast. At this point, we'll sign out and hopefully see you the next time we have such great information to share with you. Thank you so much.